This video is going to talk about unit rate. So we're going to talk about what a unit rate is and how we calculate it. And first, I just want to remind you of the work we've done with ratios. And of course, a ratio is a comparison of two or more quantities. And if I have two quantities, A and B, I can write that three ways. So I have A to B written with a colon, A to B written with the word to, and I also have the fraction form that we're going to use most in this video, which is A to B written in fraction form. So in an example here with blue and red, I might say my ratio of blue to red in fraction form is 6 to 2. So that's how that would look as a fraction. We've worked with ratios, but there is a special ratio that we call unit rate, which is going to be our focus today. And that's the specific ratio where one of the quantities is 1. So it's letting you know how much there is of one thing when the other value is 1. So back to my original example, right? If I want to know how many blue I have when I just have one red, I can think, well, there's one red, that's half as much. So I'm going to need half as much blue. So the unit rate is 3 blue per 1 red. And you're going to see that per a lot. But basically, unit rate is when one of the values in the ratio is 1. If someone tells you that you can get 2 burgers for $10, or it's $10 to buy 2 burgers, they're telling you a ratio, right? The two quantities, the price for the number of burgers. And I can write that ratio kind of in this fraction form, right? $10 for 2B stands for burgers, for 2 burgers. If I want the unit price, I'm going to look for the price for 1 burger. And you're probably thinking to yourself right away, well, I know that's probably $5 for 1 burger. And you'd be right. But mathematically, what you might not realize you're doing is that you're saying, well, I had 2 burgers, so I'm going to split that by 2 to figure out that I want 1 burger. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other part of my ratio and divide that by 2 to figure out the corresponding price. I'm going to generalize that with my letters A and B again. So if the ratio is A to B, and I want to figure out how many A's I have for every one B, I can set it up this way, and you'll see here that I'm dividing B by B, right? Because that would give me a value of 1. Any number divided by itself leaves us with 1. But I need to do that to both parts of my ratio, so I divide my A value by B as well. Doing that will ensure that we keep an equivalent ratio in the end, right? The idea here is that we're looking for equivalent ratios, but one of the numbers in the equivalent ratio this time is 1. The ratio in this example talks about driving 150 miles in 3 hours. So the ratio is miles to hours from Portland to Seattle. And the question would be, how many miles per hour does it take? So I'm going to point this part out first. So this says per hour. So that means we're looking for a unit rate of 1 hour. As I set up my ratio, that means hour is going to be on the bottom. So I'm going to say 150 miles. And I'm going to write 3 hours as my denominator. From there, I know I'm trying to get the denominator to be 1 hour. And of course, to do that, I need to divide 3 by 3 to equal 1. So I'm going to do the same thing on my numerator, and 150 divided by 3 is 50. Which means the unit rate is 50 miles in 1 hour, or 50 miles per hour. Think about an example that you might be familiar with when you're shopping, right? Different things cost amounts per pound or per ounce. We're going to talk about a grocery store that sells 25 pounds of granola for $100, a big bulk amount. There are actually 2 different unit rates you can do for this and for any other situation. We could figure out the price per pound, but we might also want to know how much granola we can get per dollar. Those are 2 different things, and I'll show you both of those. If we want the price per pound, we would need to put pounds on the bottom. So we know there are 25 pounds, and that costs $100. To figure out the price per pound, we're going to divide by our denominator, and we're going to divide 100 by 25, and that will tell us that it costs $4 for 1 pound, right? So that's the first unit rate. However, we might want to know how much we can get for $1. So in that case, I would flip this. I would do the inverse, and I would say I know that I have $100 and I can get 25 pounds for that. So I'm going to figure out my amount per dollar by putting my 100 on the denominator. But then I would have to divide by my denominator, which was 100. And in doing so, I'd figure out my $1. And if I do 25 divided by 100, I would end up with 0.25 or 25 hundredths. And that's a unit rate too, right? I can get a quarter of a pound, 25 hundredths of a pound for $1. If I say I have $1, how much can I get? That's how much I'd be able to get. For your turn, we're going to look at one of our common examples here, and that's with cooking. If a recipe requires 6 cups of sugar for every 4 cups of flour, as shown in the visual, I'd like you to tell me how much sugar is needed per cup of flour. So think about how you're going to set this up, right? You'll probably have a fraction form for your ratio. Think about which one's your denominator, and then figure out the value of the other portion of the ratio when the denominator is 1. And we'll share out as a class. And of course, as you're going for any of these videos, if you ever have a question, feel free to write it down, let me know. We're going to talk about this and make sure that we feel good about the topic as a whole class.